Okay, let's turn now to Michael Maharrey. Mike Maharrey is the National Communications Director for the 10th Amendment Center, and he is here to talk to us about the Nullify NSA campaign. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
All right, I want you to tell us about this initiative in Utah. Is it offnow.org, the website?
That is correct, offnow.org. It's focused not just on Utah. This is nationwide. We're going to try to get this done in every state in the union if we possibly can.
What exactly are you aiming to do here with this initiative?
Well, I think everybody is aware that the NSA has so grossly violated the Constitution, so grossly violated our basic privacy rights. I don't think there's any question about that. So the question then becomes, what are we going to do about it? And most people want to focus on the D.C. solutions. You know, they're going to call their congressman, and they're going to, send a petition to Barack Obama. They're going to wait for the non-federal employees over at the court to decide one way or the other. And we know from experience that this doesn't work. So we've come up with an idea. Actually, let me back up a second. We didn't come up with this idea at all. James Madison actually came up with the idea in Federalist 46. And he said one way to protect the Constitution and stop federal overreach is to simply refuse to cooperate with officers of the union. So that's what the whole Off Now campaign is about. We want state governments and local governments to simply refuse to work with the NSA in any capacity whatsoever. And to that end, we've created a whole program with several steps. But the first step that we're looking at is this Fourth Amendment Protection Act, which is a piece of legislation that would be at the state level. And I'll quickly run through the four things that this would address. Number one, it would prohibit the state from giving any material support to the NSA. So, for example, in the state of Utah, we've got this data center. It uses some 1.7 million gallons of water every day, or at least it will once it's fully operational. That water is supplied by Bluffdale, Utah, which is a subdivision of the state. The state has the authority and the power to simply say to Bluffdale, you can't do business with them. That would cut off the water, no cooling, no spy computers. So that's kind of the idea, and we want to repeat this in every state. Every place that the NSA tries to go to build these data centers, we want the states to refuse any cooperation, any material support. Number two, data sharing. We know from the Snowden revelations that federal government shares this information. The NSA gathers it unconstitutionally and shares it with state and local law enforcement. It's gathered without a warrant. Part of this act would prohibit the state from utilizing any information that was taken without a warrant in any court or any judicial hearing. So therefore, it makes this NSA data useless at the state level. Third part of this deals with universities. 166 universities across the United States have partnerships with the NSA. They call them Centers of Academic Excellence, a nice Orwellian terminology there. And these universities provide assistance to the NSA through research and also providing recruiting grounds for future NSA spies. Obviously, in a state school, the state government has a great deal of control over the purse strings and over what the policies of the state university are. We're going to harness that to forbid the state universities from working with the NSA. And then finally, in areas where we have private corporations that are doing business with the NSA, we can do two things. One thing, we can just put public pressure on these corporations, but importantly, from the state level, the state can refuse to do business with them and forbid them from having any ability to bid for contracts, either with the state or local government. So it gives them some disincentive to do business with the NSA. So that's the legislation in a nutshell.
Who came up with that? That's great.
It was kind of, throw a whole bunch of ideas in a big pot, and that's what blew out of it. Michael Bolden, our executive director, started off by doing a lot of research, and he came across some articles that revealed that one of the reasons they built this big data center in Utah is that they had maxed out the power grid there in Maryland, where they're currently located. And there was all these articles about how, they were afraid that they weren't going to have the power and that they weren't going to be able to do all the spying that they wanted to do because they didn't have access to utility. So that's one of the reasons they moved. And Bolden and people that were thinking about this started saying, well, you know what? Look at this. We've got city and state governments providing utilities. Why not cut it off? So that's kind of how it developed, and from there we worked up the legislation, got some of our legal analysts involved in it, and kind of tightened up the legal language, and here we are.
Well, that just blows me away because that is such a such a beautiful idea just for its simplicity. It's so wonderful. Now, this initiative has gotten some pretty high-profile press so far. I mean, I saw an update from Michael Bolden saying that Time magazine was covering it. What do you attribute this to? I mean, you guys are just getting started here. I mean, you're really just kicking this thing off, and already you've got two major titans of the establishment reporting on it.
You know, I work in media, or at least I used to work in the media world, so I kind of understand how it operates. And it's very much a follow-the-leader type of thing. So the key in getting any publicity for anything is getting that first media outlet to bite, and U.S. News was the first to bite. And actually, I sent out a press release earlier this week after the Utah newspaper, the Salt Lake Tribune, actually ran a very nice expose revealing through record requests that they got the deal that the NSA worked out with the city of Bluffdale for the water. So when this came out, we press released that, and the guy at U.S. News, for whatever reason, it intrigued him, and he wrote the article. And so then Time, obviously, that's their competitor. You know, they looked at it and go, "Oh, we better do something," and it's kind of picked up from there. We've gotten a lot of radio requests. We've gotten requests from Blaze to do a TV interview later this evening. So it's starting to resonate, and I think this issue resonates with people. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that we can debate about, and people get on one side of the aisle or the other, but pretty much nobody wants people peeking around in their personal business. So this resonates with people across the political spectrum, and I think it's one area where everybody can say, the government is just way over bounds here. Let's do something about it. As we were developing the campaign and as we were working out, okay, how are we going to communicate these ideas to people? One of the things that we've really studied in depth was state-level resistance to the Fugitive Slave Act.
I was just going to say that.
Well, I mean, in the 1800s, you started having these fugitive slave laws, and you had the slave catchers going up into the north and trying to round up their runaway slaves. And, of course, in the process, they also rounded up free blacks because this was a lucrative market. And northern states, defying the Supreme Court, defying Congress, defying all of the conditional wisdom out of Washington, D.C., passed a series of personal liberty laws that thwarted these efforts. And one of the primary strategies that they used was non-cooperation, exactly what Madison suggested in Federalist 46, exactly what we're doing with NSA. They simply said, you know what? If you're going to try to round up slaves here in Michigan, you're not going to use our jails. In Massachusetts, they said, you know what? If you are a sitting judge or a lawyer in this state, you will not be employed by a fugitive slave commission, or else you'll be disbarred. And ultimately, they kept ratcheting it up. I mean, by the late 1850s, you actually had the state of Vermont essentially saying, any black person that's within our borders, we consider them free, and if you try to round them up, we're going to charge you with kidnapping. That was the ultimate end game. We've already got 3 firm commitments from state legislators who say they're going to run this bill. And Brett Hildebrand in Kansas, he's running a bill that doesn't address all 4 of those issues, but it does address the data sharing, and he's already got this bill drafted. So essentially we've got 4 states already on board, and we haven't even gotten into bill filing time yet.
So you guys then at offnow.org have put up model legislation, and then individual states can modify it according to their own circumstances. Is that how it works?
Exactly. And what we really encourage people to do, and all of your listeners, take a few minutes, go download that legislation, and email a copy of it to your state representative and your state senator. Send them the links to the OffNow website because it's really nicely set up. They did a great job designing this, mostly Michael Bolden. He just did a fantastic job, and it's easy to get through all the talking points to understand exactly what we're doing. Send this to your state legislators and encourage them to introduce it, because that's the key. We need to get the information out there. That's the key right now, is to educate people. And as these legislators hear about it, some of them are going to say, you know what, this is a pretty good idea. There's actually a legal doctrine that is well established. It's called the anti-commandeering doctrine. And it rests on 4 Supreme Court cases that date all the way back to 1842. And interestingly, the very first case was a fugitive slave case. And it was Joseph Story, who loved national power. But he actually did say that the federal government was in charge of fugitive slave rendition and the states did not have to help out. So that was really kind of the first case where you saw this idea that the federal government can't commandeer the state resources. And then we have 3 more cases that are more modern, New York versus the U.S., and then the Keystone case is Prince versus U.S., and then the recent healthcare ruling. All of these establish very firmly that the federal government cannot commandeer or force state or local government to help them implement or enforce any type of federal act or action. They don't have to do it. It violates state sovereignty, and even the judges on the Supreme Court have agreed with this. So we're on absolutely solid ground from a legal standpoint.